The rubber sole of her sneaker squeaked against the polished marble, a lonely sound in the echoing quiet of the 70th floor. Isla pushed them up, the scent of ammonia and lemon cutting through the stale, recycled air of the skyscraper. It was after midnight. The only light came from the sprawling city below and the single office at the end of the hall, its glass walls revealing the figures inside. She was supposed to be invisible, a ghost who came after the real people left, erasing the traces of their important days. That was the job. Mop, wipe, empty the trash, and never ever listen. But the voices carried. One was a woman's, musical and persuasive. The other was a man's, a low rumble like distant thunder. She recognized it. Dante Moretti, the owner of Moretti Global Imports, the name on the lease for the top 10 floors. The man whose portrait did not hang in the lobby, but whose presence was felt in the tremor of fear from every suit who worked for him. Isla had only seen him in person twice. Both times he moved with a predatory stillness that made the air itself seem to hold its breath. She pushed her bucket closer to his office door, feigning diligence as she wiped down the baseboards. She just needed to get the trash from his office, and she could leave this floor, leave him and his late-night meeting behind. The woman was speaking again, her tone sweet as honey. "And this clause here," she said, "it's just a standard liability transfer. It ensures that if any regulatory issues arise from the shipping origin, the risk is distributed. It's for your protection, darling." Isla glanced up. Through the glass, she could see the woman, Tiffany, a blonde with a smile as sharp and bright as broken glass, leaning over Dante's shoulder. Her manicured finger tapped a paragraph on a thick document spread across his massive mahogany desk. Dante was motionless, his jaw set, his dark eyes fixed on the page. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Isla's entire life, the fabric draping perfectly over his broad shoulders. He looked carved from stone. Isla's gaze drifted to the document. The angle was poor, but a single phrase, projected from a laptop onto a nearby screen for another man in the room to see, was perfectly clear.
Cessione in blocco.
She froze, her hand tightening on the damp rag in her hand. Her blood went cold. She knew that term. She knew it from late nights in the university law library, from a pro bono case her professor had used as a cautionary tale. It wasn't a liability transfer.
It was a block session.
A complete transfer of assets and associated debts, bundled and sold as one. In this context, with the other party being the Kuznetsov family, it wasn't protection. It was a corporate garrote. It would let them seize his shipping routes, his warehouses, everything, by triggering a single, manufactured debt default. It would bankrupt him. It would gut him. His girlfriend, Tiffany, was not translating. She was lying. Isla's heart hammered against her ribs. This was not her business. She was the cleaner. Her job was to be unseen, unheard. To warn him was to announce herself, to step into a world she had scrambled to escape. To stay silent was to watch a man, no matter how dangerous, be led to his own slaughter. She looked at Dante Moretti, at the cold certainty on his face as he reached for a pen. He was about to sign. She told herself to turn around, to push her cart to the elevator and go home. She had a brother to support. She could not afford to lose this job. She could not afford to be noticed by a man like Dante Moretti. But the image of her own father's face flashed in her mind, his trusting smile as he signed a similar paper, a paper that had cost them everything. She dropped the rag. Before she could second-guess it, she knocked on the glass door. Once.
Twice. Hard.
The three people inside looked up. The other man, a burly figure with a pale, flat face, scowled. Tiffany's perfect smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of pure venom. But Dante Moretti's expression did not change. He simply lifted his gaze, his dark eyes locking onto hers.
They were not brown, she realized.
They were the color of black coffee, and they saw everything. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The door was unlocked. Isla pushed it open. The air inside was different, thick with the scent of expensive sandalwood and the metallic tang of tension. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She kept her eyes on the floor. I just need to get the trash. Get it and go, Tiffany snapped, her voice losing its honeyed edge. Isla moved toward the wastebasket beside his desk, her path taking her past the document. Her mind raced.
How could she do this?
She grabbed the liner of the bin. Her fingers brushed the edge of the desk. That term, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The one she pointed to. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. She forced herself to look up, to meet Dante Moretti's unnerving stare. It doesn't mean what she said it means. Tiffany let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Excuse me? Who do you think you are? The other man, the Kuznetsov representative, stood up slowly. He looked from Isla to Dante, a predator sensing a disruption in the hunt. Dante did not look at his girlfriend. He did not look at the Russian. His eyes remained locked on Isla. The stillness around him intensified, became heavier. What does it mean? He asked. His voice was quiet, but it commanded the entire room. Isla swallowed, her throat dry. It means you're not distributing risk. You're signing over the entire asset portfolio. It's a block session. They can call in a single debt, even a minor one, and the entire portfolio becomes theirs. It's an execution clause, not a protection clause. The color drained from Tiffany's face. The Russian took a half step back, his hand twitching toward the inside of his jacket. Dante's gaze flickered from Isla's face to the document, then back. He read the clause again, then looked at Tiffany. The coldness in his eyes was absolute. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. You have 5 minutes to get out of my building, he said to her. It was not a suggestion. Tiffany's mouth opened and closed. Betrayal and panic warred on her face. Dante, this is insane. You're going to listen to the help. He turned his head a fraction of an inch toward the Russian. Our business is concluded, Mr. Kuznetsov. For good. The Russian's eyes narrowed into slits. He gave a curt, vicious nod, turned, and walked out of the office without a word, leaving the door swinging shut behind him. Tiffany, tears of rage now streaming down her face, grabbed her purse and followed, throwing a look of pure hatred at Isla. And then they were alone. The silence that descended was heavier than the one before. It was just Isla, standing with a plastic trash bag in her hand, and Dante Moretti, sitting behind a desk that felt like a throne. She thought she could leave now. She thought she had done the right thing, and now she could slip back into the shadows where she belonged. But he moved, pushing his chair back. He stood up, his height and presence filling the room, shrinking it. Close the door, he said. And lock it. Her heart hammered. This was it. This was the consequence. She had stepped out of the shadows, and now the darkness was closing in around her. She did as he said, the click of the lock sounding like a cell door slamming shut. When she turned back, he was standing in front of the desk, no longer behind it. The barrier was gone. Sit, he commanded, gesturing to one of the plush leather chairs opposite his desk. She remained standing. I should go. My shift is over. Your shift is over when I say it is, he stated, his voice calm, yet immovable. You just saved me from a mistake that would have cost me 9 figures and likely my life. I need to know how a cleaner from the night crew understands the nuances of international contract law. He wasn't angry. He was something far more terrifying. He was calculating. He was assessing her, the way a jeweler assesses a strange, unidentifiable stone that had just appeared on his velvet cloth. Isla knew in that moment that she could not simply walk away. By saving him, she had made herself his problem. And Dante Moretti always solved his problems. She sat. The leather was cold against the back of her legs. He remained standing, looking down at her, a monolith of power and quiet menace. My father, she began, her voice small but clear. He owned a small construction business.
He was a good man.
A trusting man. Someone showed him a contract with a term like that in it. They told him it was standard. He lost everything. Dante watched her, his expression unreadable. So you went to law school, it wasn't a question. I started, she corrected. For 2 years. Then he got sick. I had to drop out. She didn't add that the stress of the bankruptcy had destroyed his health.
She didn't need to.
The story was etched on her face. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, looking out at the glittering expanse of the city. "Betrayal is a cancer," he said, his voice a low murmur. "It grows in the dark. You trust someone. You bring them into your home, into your bed. You let them see your vulnerabilities. And they use it to plant a knife in your back." He was not talking about her. He was talking about Tiffany. He was talking about a wound much older than this night. "My father trusted his brother," Dante continued, his reflection a faint ghost in the glass. "Gave him a place at the table. Vouched for him. His brother sold him to the commission for a piece of territory in Boston. They shot my father on the steps of his own church." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. He was showing her a piece of his soul, the rotten, wounded part he kept hidden from the world. It was not a gesture of trust. It was a test. He was seeing what she would do with it. A vibration from his pocket broke the spell. He pulled out his phone, his eyes narrowing as he read the screen. "Kuznetsov is not happy. He's put a cleanup crew on the building." Isla's blood ran cold. "A cleanup crew. Not janitors," he said, turning from the window. The cold, calculating look was back. "They know someone in this office stopped the deal. They don't know who. They will be indiscriminate." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than command in his eyes. It was a problem he hadn't anticipated. Her. "You can't leave through the lobby. You can't go home." Therefore, she was trapped. Her small act of courage had not just put her on his radar, it had placed her directly in the line of fire. He strode to a section of polished wood paneling on the wall and pressed it. A hidden door hissed open, revealing a small, private elevator. "You're coming with me," he said. It wasn't an invitation.
It was a fact.
Her old life, the one where she was an anonymous cleaner mopping floors and dreaming of a past she couldn't reclaim, had ended the moment she knocked on that glass door. The elevator was a small, claustrophobic box of steel and dark leather. It descended with a stomach-lurching speed that was completely silent. Isla stood pressed against the far wall, as far from him as she could get. The space was charged, filled with the scent of his sandalwood cologne and the unspoken reality of their situation. He hadn't touched her, but she felt branded by his presence. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tight. "Somewhere safe," he replied, his gaze fixed on the glowing floor numbers as they flew past. "For now." The elevator opened directly into a private, underground garage. A black sedan, low and sleek, sat waiting, its engine already humming. A man with a shaved head and a thick neck stood by the driver's door. He nodded at Dante, his eyes flicking to Isla for a fraction of a second, his expression neutral but questioning. "Get in the back," Dante ordered her. She slid onto the cool leather seat. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing them inside. Dante got in beside her, not in the front. The proximity was immediate, overwhelming. Her shoulder was inches from his. She could feel the heat radiating from him. The driver pulled away smoothly, navigating the labyrinthine garage and exiting onto a dark, empty street. They drove in silence for what felt like an hour, leaving the glittering towers of Manhattan behind and crossing a bridge into the shadowed, industrial landscape of Brooklyn. The car finally slowed, turning into a desolate alley and stopping before a featureless steel door on the side of an old brick warehouse. "We're here," the driver announced. Dante got out, and Isla followed. The air was cold, smelling of brine from the nearby river and decay. He led her to the steel door, unlocking it with a key. Inside, a narrow staircase led up into darkness. He went first, his footsteps echoing softly. She followed, her hand trailing on the cold, dusty brick wall. The apartment at the top of the stairs was a shock. It was a vast, open loft, the complete opposite of the derelict exterior. It was starkly modern, with polished concrete floors, minimalist furniture, and a massive wall of windows overlooking the dark, churning water of the East River. It was beautiful, but it was not a home. It was a cage. A very expensive cage. "There's a bedroom through there," he said, gesturing down a short hall. "Bathroom. The kitchen is stocked." Don't go near the windows. He walked to the kitchen island, pulling a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses from a cabinet. He poured a generous amount into each, pushing one across the smooth stone countertop toward her.
She looked at it. I don't drink, she said.
Tonight you do, he replied, his voice leaving no room for argument. He took a long swallow from his own glass, his eyes never leaving her face. Now we wait. For what? For Kuznetsov to show his hand. Or for my men to find Tiffany. Whichever comes first, he leaned against the counter, the picture of calm. But Isla saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tightened around his glass. He was a predator backed into a corner, and that made him more dangerous than ever. The waiting was a new kind of torture. The silence in the huge loft was broken only by the distant moan of a ship's horn and the quiet, rhythmic tap of Dante's signet ring against his glass. He didn't speak to her. He just watched. Isla felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, her every twitch and breath examined. She eventually retreated to the bedroom he'd indicated, not to sleep, but just to put a wall between them. Hours later, the sound of a crash from the main room jolted her to her feet. It was followed by a string of curses in a language she didn't recognize, then a sickening thud. Her heart leaped into her throat. She crept to the door, pressing her ear against it. She heard a grunt of pain. It was Dante's. Then a new voice, laced with a thick Russian accent. Moretti, your little canary flew the coop.
But we know she's with you. Give her to us.
We can forget this whole unfortunate business. Isla's blood turned to ice. They had found them. She heard Dante laugh, a low, humorless sound. You can't even get your own betrayals right, Victor. You come into my city, try to gut me with a cheap legal trick, and when it fails, you send thugs to a safe house you shouldn't know exists. It's sloppy. The girl, Victor repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Or we take this place apart with you in it. Isla backed away from the door, her mind racing. There was no escape. The windows were a sheer drop to the river. The only way out was through them. She looked around the Spartan bedroom. There was nothing. A bed, a dresser, a lamp.
No weapon.
No hope. Then, the sound of an explosion rocked the building, a concussive blast from downstairs that shattered the massive windows in the main room. Wind and the spray of cold river water howled into the loft. Gunshots erupted, a chaotic exchange of fire. Isla threw herself to the floor, covering her head as plaster rained down from the ceiling. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it began. The silence that followed was terrifying. She waited, her breath held tight in her chest. Then, she heard a single set of footsteps, heavy and slow, approaching the bedroom door. The doorknob turned. Dante stood there, framed in the doorway. His face was grim, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt stained with blood high on his left shoulder. He held a pistol in his right hand, held loosely at his side. They're gone, he said, his voice strained. They blew the entrance to cover their retreat. He took a step into the room and swayed, his hand going to the wall to steady himself. You're hurt, she breathed, scrambling to her feet. It's nothing, but even as he said it, a fresh bloom of red soaked through his shirt. He was bleeding badly. You need a doctor. No doctors, he grunted, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor.
No hospitals.
That's the first place they'd look. Her mind, sharpened by adrenaline, went into overdrive. The pro bono clinic she'd volunteered at. The triage training they'd given everyone. It was basic, but it was something. Take off your shirt, she ordered, her voice taking on an authority that surprised them both. He looked at her, a flash of surprise in his dark eyes, but he did as she said, shrugging out of the ruined shirt with a wince of pain. The wound was a deep, vicious gash along his collarbone, furrowed and bleeding freely. A ricochet, or maybe a knife. In the bathroom, she said, thinking fast. The first aid kit is a joke. Is there anything else? A sewing kit? Hard liquor? He nodded toward a drawer in the dresser. My mother insisted. Said a man should know how to sew on a button. He forced a grim smile. There's whiskey in the kitchen. She worked quickly, her hand surprisingly steady. She found the small, forgotten sewing kit, and a bottle of expensive single malt. She poured the amber liquid over the needle, sterilizing it in the flame from a lighter she found on the dresser. She tore a strip from the hem of her own shirt to use as a bandage. She knelt in front of him. The space between them was electric, intimate. His skin was warm, his muscles tense beneath her fingers as she cleaned the wound with a whiskey-soaked cloth. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. He just watched her, his gaze intense, analytical, as if he were memorizing the lines of her face. "You're not afraid," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "I'm terrified," she admitted, threading the needle without looking up. "My hands are shaking." "But you're still here," he said. It was not a question. It was a recognition. A confession that passed between them in the space of a heartbeat. She was not one of his men, bound by an oath. She was not family tied by blood. She was a cleaner who had every reason to run, and she had stayed. In his world, that was a currency more valuable than gold. That silence was the confession. They both knew it. She began to stitch the wound, her movements careful and precise. The needle pierced his skin. He inhaled sharply but remained still, his eyes locked on her. The act was brutal, necessary, and more intimate than any touch they had shared. She was literally knitting him back together, crossing a line from which there was no return. She was no longer just a witness.
She was a part of this.
When she was finished, she tied off the thread and gently taped a makeshift bandage over the crude stitches. Her fingers were slick with his blood. He reached up, his uninjured hand catching her wrist. His grip was surprisingly gentle. His thumb brushed over her pulse point.
"Isla," he said.
He had said her name before in his office. Then it had been a command. Now it was something else entirely. It sounded like a discovery. Before she could process it, his phone, lying on the floor beside him, buzzed again. He released her and picked it up. A text message. His face hardened as he read it.
"What is it?" she asked.
He looked up from the phone, and the brief flicker of connection was gone, replaced by a cold, hard wall. "It's from Kuznetsov." He turned the screen toward her. It was a picture. A photo of the cheap, walk-up apartment building she lived in. A red circle was drawn around her window. The message below, it was simple. "We know who she is. We know where she lives." Dante's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. He looked at her, and the calculation was back in his eyes, colder than ever. She was no longer an unexpected asset. She was a liability, a target, a direct threat to the security of his entire operation. To protect her was to invite a war he wasn't ready for. To abandon her was the logical choice. "You need to disappear," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I'll give you cash. A new name, a new life. A bus ticket to somewhere no one will ever find you." She stared at him. After everything. After she had saved him, stitched his wound, and tied her fate to his, he was cutting her loose. It was the smart move. The boss's move. But it felt like a betrayal deeper than any Tiffany could have managed. She shook her head.
"No."
His eyes narrowed. "This is not a negotiation. They'll find me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "A new name and some cash won't stop them. You know it and I know it. Running is just a slower way to die." She stood up, looking down at him. The power dynamic had shifted. He was the one wounded on the floor. She was the one with the clear head. "You said it yourself. Kuznetsov is sloppy. His attack on this safe house proves it. He's emotional." "What's your point?" he asked, his voice laced with impatient danger. "My point," she said, her legal mind clicking into place, "is that the contract they tried to trick you with is their weakness. They exposed their entire strategy. They want your shipping infrastructure, which means their own must be lacking. That cession and blocko clause, it's a predator's move, but it's also a desperate one-inch." She began to pace, the plan forming in her mind. "You can't just defend against them. You have to cripple them. And I know how." He watched her, the surprise returning to his face, warring with decades of ingrained caution. He was seeing her for the first time, not as a cleaner or a victim or a liability, but as a weapon he hadn't known he possessed. You want to go to war with the Kuznetsov family, he said, a hint of disbelief in his tone. You? A girl who was mopping my floors 12 hours ago. That girl saw the trap that your girlfriend, your lawyers, and you all missed. She shot back, her fear replaced by a cold, sharp anger. You can send me away to die, Dante. Or you can use me to win. He was silent for a long moment, studying her. The master of a violent, merciless world, being given tactical advice by the one person he was supposed to protect and discard. She had refused to be rescued. She was demanding to fight. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. He reached for his phone and dialed. Marco, he said into the phone. Change of plans. The girl stays. She's with me. He hung up. The words echoed in the ruined loft. She's with me. It wasn't a promise of safety. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a statement of ownership. A claim. He had made his decision. And in doing so, he had sealed her fate. The cost of that decision came quickly. The plan Isla devised was elegant in its brutality. It used Kuznetsov's own legal aggression against him, creating a cascade of regulatory investigations and contractual traps that targeted his already over-leveraged supply lines. But plans required execution, and execution was messy. Dante's underboss, Marco, led a team to secure a key piece of evidence from a warehouse controlled by the Russians. They were successful, but it was not clean. A young soldier, a boy of only 19 named Leo who had always smiled at Isla in the hallway of the safe house, did not come back. Isla saw the price of this world written on the faces of the men when they returned, saw it in the hard, grim line of Dante's mouth as he was given the news. There was no victory parade, only the quiet, heavy weight of a debt paid in blood. Tiffany was found in a hotel at the airport, about to board a flight to a country with no extradition treaty. Isla was not told what happened to her. She did not ask. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. A week later, it was over. The Kuznetsov organization was fractured, their American operation in ruins. Dante had not just survived. He had conquered. They were back in his penthouse office, the place where it had all begun. The shattered windows of the safe house were a distant memory. Here, the glass was whole, the view of the city a pristine, glittering tapestry of power. The room was silent. Isla stood by the window, the same one he had stood before when he told her about his father. She was no longer wearing a cleaner's uniform. She wore a simple, dark dress Dante's men had procured for her. It felt like a costume. He came to stand beside her, his arm now in a sling beneath a perfectly tailored suit. They looked down at the city, at the rivers of light flowing through the concrete canyons. This world, he said, his voice a low rumble beside her. It costs. There is always a cost. I know, she replied. She had seen the bill. She had watched it be paid. He turned to face her. The office lights caught the angles of his face, throwing his scar into sharp relief. For the first time since she had met him, the cold, calculating guard in his eyes had fallen away, leaving something raw and exposed. It was not softness. It was certainty. He held out his hand, not to shake, not to guide, but palm up. An offering, a question without words. This was the final choice. Not the one in the ruined safe house made under duress, but this one. Here, in the calm after the storm. She could take his money now. She could walk away, and this time, he would let her go. He would ensure her safety from a distance. She could try to piece her old life back together. Or she could stay. She looked from his outstretched hand to his face. She saw the man who ruled a dark kingdom, the man who dealt in violence and fear. But she also saw the man who had listened to a cleaner, the man whose eyes held the ghost of a murdered father, the man who had stood between her and a bullet. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand and placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, his grip warm and firm. It was not a gentle touch. It was a brand. A final, irrevocable claim. The city lights blurred below them, forgotten. The only thing that mattered was the solid weight of his hand in hers and the silent, binding contract that had just been signed.